Most people assume that wanting someone you can't have is a simple matter of attraction, timing, or chemistry. But psychology shows it's far more complicated. The desire for the unavailable person is almost never about who they are. It's about what they represent. It activates unconscious patterns that formed long before adulthood, patterns shaped by attachment, scarcity, insecurity, and emotional conditioning. When a person becomes unavailable, distant, or unattainable, they trigger ancient survival mechanisms that push you to chase, idealize, and obsess. And this dynamic is so powerful that it often overrides logic, self-respect, and even personal values. Understanding why this happens is the first step toward breaking the cycle. The root of this desire usually lies in how your nervous system learned to experience connection in childhood. The human brain does not learn love from words. It learns it from patterns. If as a child you had caregivers who were emotionally inconsistent, warm at times, cold at others, your nervous system learned a specific rule. Connection must be earned. Affection is unpredictable. Love is something you chase, not something that comes naturally. This forms an anxious attachment blueprint, and the blueprint doesn't disappear when you grow up. It simply adapts to adult relationships. So, when you meet someone inconsistent, emotionally cold, or unavailable, your nervous system recognizes the pattern and activates. The unfamiliar feels dangerous. The familiar feels like home. You are drawn to the emotional rhythm you were trained to expect, even if it's unhealthy. Another layer of this dynamic comes from the brain's response to scarcity. Humans are evolutionarily wired to value things that are limited or hard to obtain. In prehistoric times, something scarce was likely essential: food, shelter, resources. The brain evolved to prioritize scarce things because they meant survival. Now that instinct misfires in modern relationships. When someone is distant or unavailable, they become a scarce resource, and your brain elevates their value automatically, even if logically they don't deserve it. The more unavailable they are, the more the brain amplifies desire. This neurological loop gets reinforced by dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with reward, anticipation, and pursuit. Dopamine spikes not when you get the reward, but when you anticipate it. So the more unpredictable the person is, the more your brain floods with dopamine, making the pursuit addictive. This is the same mechanism that keeps people hooked on gambling. The reward is inconsistent, so the anticipation becomes intoxicating. But the psychological hook goes even deeper. When a person is unavailable, they give your mind room to create fantasy. Because they are not fully present, you fill the gaps with projections, imagining who they could be, how they would treat you, and what the relationship could look like if circumstances were different. You fall in love with a potential version of them, not the real one. And because the potential is never tested, it remains perfect in your imagination. Real relationships expose flaws. Imaginary ones stay ideal. The less someone gives you, the more your mind compensates, and this idealization becomes a powerful emotional attachment, even when evidence shows they're not good for you. Psychology also explains that unavailability often intersects with insecurity. People who doubt their worth are more prone to chasing unavailable partners because they subconsciously see these partners as validation objects. If you feel not enough, winning over someone who seems unreachable feels like proof of value. You start to believe that if this person finally chooses you, it means you were worthy all along. Their approval becomes a symbol of redemption. This dynamic is dangerous because it attaches your self-worth to someone else's inconsistent behavior. Instead of asking whether the person is right for you, you become consumed with whether you can win them. And the more they pull away, the harder you try, because rejection feels like a challenge to overcome rather than a signal to step back. There is also an element of emotional avoidance at play. Paradoxically, people often chase unavailable partners precisely because, deep down, they fear real intimacy. Real intimacy requires vulnerability, honesty, and emotional exposure. It requires letting someone see your flaws. For many people, especially those with unresolved emotional wounds, that level of closeness feels terrifying. But chasing someone you can't have feels safe. It allows you to feel intense emotions, longing, excitement, hope, without the risk that comes with a real relationship. You can stay emotionally invested while avoiding true vulnerability. You can play out the fantasy of connection without ever having to face the challenges of real intimacy. In this way, desiring the unavailable person becomes a form of emotional self-protection disguised as passion. Another piece of this puzzle is identity reinforcement. When someone becomes the center of your emotional focus, the pursuit itself can become part of your identity. You begin to define yourself through the longing, the effort, the waiting. The hope of being chosen becomes intertwined with your sense of self. You may tell yourself you're loyal, romantic, or committed, but often you're simply caught in a loop where chasing someone unattainable creates a sense of purpose. You convince yourself that the intensity of your desire means the connection is special, when in reality, it just means your emotional system is activated by unpredictability and scarcity. The psychology of desire also involves cognitive dissonance. When you invest time, hope, emotion, or effort into someone, your brain tries to justify the investment. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy. The more you give, the more you feel you must continue, because stopping would mean admitting that all the effort was for nothing. So instead of pulling away when the person shows little interest, you double down, hoping your investment will eventually pay off. This keeps you emotionally stuck long after logic tells you to let go. On top of all of this, unavailable people often exhibit behaviors that intensify attachment. Mixed signals, small moments of attention, kindness, or flirtation followed by distance, create emotional confusion. This intermittent reinforcement strengthens attachment far more than consistent affection ever could. The brain interprets occasional rewards as signs of potential, even when the overall pattern is clearly dismissive or indifferent. And because the brain hates uncertainty, it focuses obsessively on the positive moments, inflating their significance while minimizing the negative ones. You begin to believe that the moments of closeness reveal the real person, and the distance is just a misunderstanding or temporary phase. This creates a narrative where you see their potential, but ignore their reality. There's also a developmental explanation rooted in something psychologists call repetition compulsion. Humans are drawn to familiar emotional experiences, even painful ones, because the brain prefers predictable discomfort over unpredictable safety. If, as a child, you internalize the idea that love involves inconsistency, emotional distance, or longing, you will unconsciously recreate those dynamics in adulthood. It's not that you enjoy suffering, it's that the emotional pattern feels recognizable. The unavailable person fits the emotional script your nervous system expects, so even though the relationship hurts, it feels psychologically coherent. Another psychological factor involved in desiring the unavailable person is something known as the illusion of control. When someone doesn't reciprocate your feelings, you may start believing that if you behave differently, communicate more perfectly, look better, or improve yourself in some way, you can change their feelings. This illusion gives you a sense of agency, even when the situation is completely outside your control. The fantasy that you can earn their affection keeps you hooked because it suggests the outcome is influenced by your actions. But in reality, the person's emotional availability has nothing to do with your worth or effort. It comes from their own issues, preferences, and limitations. Yet the illusion of control keeps you engaged, constantly trying to unlock the version of them you hope exists. Another overlooked element is the role of social comparison. When someone is desired by others or seems selective, your brain perceives them as high value. This activates competitive instincts rooted in evolution, where access to a high-status mate increased survival prospects. Even today, when someone appears selective or hard to get, people interpret it as a sign of higher value. This perception increases desire, making the unavailable person seem more attractive than they objectively are. Their unavailability is interpreted not as disinterest, but as exclusivity, even though these two things are entirely different. Eventually, the obsession develops a life of its own. You begin to analyze every detail, every text, every silence, every interaction, searching for clues, signs, meaning. You mentally edit reality to protect the fantasy, interpreting random behaviors as hidden affection. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more you analyze, the more emotionally invested you become. And the more invested you are, the harder it is to walk away. Your mind becomes a battlefield between logic and longing wins because it speaks to the oldest wounds and deepest insecurities. Breaking this cycle requires confronting the internal mechanisms that fuel it. It means acknowledging that the desire has less to do with the other person and more to do with your own emotional patterns. It means examining what feels familiar in their unavailability and asking why familiarity feels safer than genuine connection. It means understanding that longing is not love, intensity is not intimacy, and scarcity is not value. It means revisiting the belief that love must be earned and replacing it with a healthier truth. Authentic connection doesn't require chasing, it requires mutuality. The moment you understand the psychological machinery behind your desire is the moment the person loses their power. They stop being a symbol of hope, validation, or redemption and become simply a person, one who, in reality, has little to offer you emotionally. And once the fantasy collapses, you can finally create space for relationships based on presence rather than absence, reciprocity rather than longing, and emotional safety rather than emotional survival.